The heavy mahogany safe stood wide open, its shelves stacked with neat bundles of cash that almost gleamed in the soft lamplight. Alexander Grant lay motionless on the velvet couch, his eyes half closed. The rhythm of his breathing slowed until it mimicked slumber. He had chosen this exact night to test what honesty looked like when no one was watching. Too many betrayals had scarred him, the last one by a trusted partner who siphoned millions from under his nose. Tonight was different tonight. He wanted to see what the world was still capable of when temptation dangled close enough to touch. The apartment door clicked, soft footsteps entered, and a woman's tired sigh echoed across the quiet room. Lillian Carter shuffled inside in her plain uniform, the weight of exhaustion evident in her posture. Behind her skipped her 6-year-old daughter, Amara, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. The child's eyes, bright and curious, darted across the luxurious penthouse with fascination. To Amara, it was a castle, though her mother always reminded her not to stare too long or dream too wildly in someone else's world. Amara tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, look, the cupboard is open." She pointed innocently toward the safe where stacks of cash seemed to spill slightly from the edge. Lillian's eyes widened. Her heart nearly stopped. The very thought of being in the same room with such wealth felt dangerous, let alone with the door ajar. She pressed a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder. "Don't touch anything, sweetheart. Just stay close to me." But Amara tilted her head, her small brow furrowed. To her young mind, money wasn't an emblem of greed or crime. It was simply paper out of place. With the same seriousness her mother had taught her to apply when sorting coins into jars at home, she toddled over, stood on her toes, and began straightening the stacks. "Hundreds with hundreds, tens with tens," she murmured under her breath, her tiny fingers aligning the bills by denomination with surprising precision. She was careful not to keep a single note, treating the wealth as though it belonged to some invisible guardian who had just forgotten to tidy up. Alexander felt his chest tighten. Beneath his feigned sleep, he watched through a sliver of eyelid as the child worked methodically, her little hands arranging thousands of dollars with all the earnestness of a girl setting her toys in order. He had expected curiosity, perhaps even the mischief of slipping a single bill into a pocket. What he saw instead was reverence, an unshaken innocence that refused to take what wasn't hers. For a man who had lost faith and trust, the sight struck like sunlight through storm clouds. When Amara finished, she dusted her palms against her skirt and whispered proudly, "All neat now, Mama." Lillian, flustered and fearful, quickly led her daughter away from the safe. "Thank you, love. Now, let's get back to work before anyone thinks we were snooping." She moved toward the cleaning cart, her movements brisk, as though hurrying away from the danger of even being near such riches. Alexander almost broke his act at that moment. A chuckle threatened to escape, but he kept still, savoring the rare sweetness of what had just unfolded before him. His pulse softened, and for the first time in years, a quiet belief flickered that perhaps honesty wasn't extinct. The evening stretched on with the gentle rhythm of chores. Lillian wiped marble counters, polished silver handles, and mopped the gleaming floors with silent precision. Amara, never one to sit idle, hummed softly as she helped her mother, carefully placing coasters back on side tables and arranging pillows with a seriousness that made Alexander's lips curl into a hidden smile. Their bond was unmistakable, woven from shared struggle and unwavering love. As midnight crept closer, Alexander stirred deliberately, pretending to wake. He stretched slowly, yawning, as though only now aware of their presence. Lillian froze, her mop pausing mid-stroke. "Oh, Mr. Grant. I didn't mean to disturb your rest. We'll finish quietly." He waved a lazy hand, masking the keen awareness inside him. "It's fine. Just carry on." His eyes lingered briefly on Amara, who clutched her teddy bear again, watching him with the unafraid gaze of a child who didn't yet know the ways of power. Later, when they left, Alexander walked to the safe. Every bundle was aligned, perfectly stacked as though an accountant had passed by. He exhaled, pressing a hand against the polished wood. In his world, betrayal had been more common than loyalty. Yet tonight, a little girl had reminded him of something he thought he had lost forever: the quiet dignity of honesty. The following week, Alexander found himself watching more closely. He observed how Lillian arrived for every shift despite working double hours at another hotel, how she carried her daughter along because she had no family nearby to help, and how Amara remained cheerful, bringing light into rooms that had only ever echoed with silence. He noticed the way Lillian's hands moved swiftly, practiced, but always gentle when she guided her daughter. He noticed her smile, rare but genuine, breaking through fatigue whenever Amara did something thoughtful. One evening, Alexander stopped her at the door. "Lillian," he said, his voice steady, "from now on, your salary will be doubled. Consider it recognition for the dedication you've shown here." Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "Mr. Grant, I don't know what to say. Thank you, sir. Truly." She clutched Amara's hand tightly, as though anchoring herself to reality. Alexander simply nodded, unwilling to reveal the real reason that it was Amara's honesty that had moved him. Some truths, he thought, were better savored in silence. Behind closed doors, however, whispers began. Not everyone shared his admiration. One pair of eyes in particular watched with growing resentment, eyes that would soon darken the fragile peace Lillian had begun to feel. Victor Lang leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers drumming impatiently against the polished oak table as the board meeting wound down. He had been Alexander Grant's vice president for over a decade, surviving by flattery, manipulation, and the kind of networking that came less from skill and more from shared prejudice in smoke-filled country clubs. When word reached him that Alexander had doubled the pay of a cleaning woman, Victor's jaw clenched. To him, hierarchy was sacred, and generosity toward people like Lillian Carter was not just wasteful but insulting. That evening, as staff bustled in and out of the grand hall, Victor cornered Lillian in the corridor. His smile was tight, his tone dripping with disdain. "You must think you're special now, don't you? A raise from the boss himself? Don't get too comfortable. Men like Alexander, they see things they like, and then they get bored. Then what will you be? Just another maid with dreams too big for her shoes." Lillian stiffened, clutching her cleaning supplies as Amara peeked curiously from behind her. She gave no reply, only lowered her head, and kept walking. She had long ago learned that silence was safer than sparring with men who wielded power like weapons. But Victor's words stuck like thorns in her chest. Alexander noticed the shift in her demeanor. She still worked with diligence, but her shoulders carried a new weight, her smile appeared less often, and she sometimes flinched when shadows moved in corridors. He began to suspect, and suspicion hardened when Marcus Chun, a former FBI investigator now consulting for the company, approached him one afternoon. "You might want to know," Marcus said in his calm, investigative tone. "Victor's been asking around about your cleaning staff. He's been making comments that border on, well, let's call it inappropriate. If you want, I can dig deeper." Alexander's response was immediate. "Do it. I want everything. Emails, messages, anything he's hiding." Meanwhile, Victor escalated his campaign. He began fabricating petty infractions against Lillian. A supposedly missed corner of dust, a vase arranged incorrectly, a report that she took too long on breaks. He filled her record with notes that suggested incompetence, hoping to create a paper trail for her dismissal. To her face, he became more sinister. One late evening in the parking lot, as Lillian strapped Amara into their old sedan, Victor appeared beside her window, his grin cruel. "You're not fooling anyone," he hissed. "People like you don't belong in places like this. You'll slip up soon, and when you do, I'll make sure you're gone. And maybe then your little girl will learn what happens when her mother aims too high." Lillian's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he walked away. She drove home in silence, her heart pounding, Amara's soft humming in the back seat the only comfort. That night, for the first time, she wept quietly while her daughter slept. She didn't want to lose this job, not after all the sacrifice, not after finally feeling some measure of stability. Unaware to her, Alexander was already taking steps. Marcus unearthed threads of corruption. Victor had been funneling company contracts to his brother-in-law's firm, pocketing kickbacks under the table. More damning were screenshots of Victor's private group chats, filled with racist remarks, memes mocking employees of color, and sneering references to Lillian herself. One message chilled Alexander. "Let's see how long it takes before the maid reaches for something shiny. They always do." Alexander felt his stomach knot. He had tolerated Victor's arrogance for years, considering it a distasteful but manageable flaw. But this was rot, dangerous and corrosive. The breaking point came one Friday night. Lillian had just finished polishing the executive offices when Victor entered, his steps deliberate. He circled her like a predator, then leaned close enough for her to smell the whiskey on his breath. "Do you know what happens to people who steal?" he whispered, holding up a gleaming Rolex. "They lose everything. And some of us are watching very closely." Before she could respond, he slipped the watch into the pocket of her cleaning cart and walked away, whistling. Lillian froze. She hadn't even touched the cart before panic swept through her body. She wanted to scream, but Amara was waiting in the lobby, and fear told her that any sound would only make her look guilty. She pushed the cart out with trembling hands, praying no one would stop her. But Victor had already tipped off security. Moments later, they confronted her in the lobby, asking to inspect her supplies. As they pulled the Rolex from the cart, the world tilted. Amara's wide eyes filled with confusion as she clutched her teddy bear. Lillian stammered, tears brimming. "That's not mine, I swear, I didn't." And then a voice cut through the chaos. Calm, cold, but carrying authority like a blade. "I know you didn't." Alexander stepped forward, Marcus at his side, and behind them stood two investigative journalists with cameras ready. Victor's smirk faltered, his confidence cracking as Alexander's eyes bored into him. "We've been watching, Victor. Every word, every move. Tonight, you just gave us what we needed." Marcus held up a tablet, pressing play on security footage. Victor slipping the Rolex into the cart, glancing around, then walking away. The journalists gasped softly, cameras capturing every detail. Alexander's voice sharpened. "This isn't just a matter of harassment. It's a conspiracy, and it ends tonight." Victor lunged forward, trying to snatch the tablet, but Marcus intercepted smoothly, years of training in his stance. Security guards, previously skeptical, now shifted to Alexander's side. In minutes, Victor Lang, once untouchable in his arrogance, was escorted out of the building in handcuffs. His protests echoed hollowly down the marble hall. "This is a setup. You can't do this to me." But no one listened. For the first time, Lillian breathed without fear, though her chest still trembled. She bent to scoop Amara into her arms, holding her daughter close as tears spilled down her cheeks. Across the hall, Alexander watched silently, his expression unreadable, though inside his heart beat with something more than just justice. Something gentler, something that surprised him almost as much as Amara's honesty had that first night. The storm was not over. A reckoning still lay ahead, one that would shake the company and redefine its future. But as Alexander guided Lillian and Amara safely out of the building that night, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Trust had returned to his life, and it came not from wealth, but from a mother and child who had nothing to give him but truth. The boardroom fell into an unnatural silence as the screen flickered with evidence emails, recorded calls, bank transactions. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his expression calm but resolute, while Marcus Chun narrated the findings with practiced precision. Around the long mahogany table, directors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. None could deny the truth laid bare before them. Victor Lang, once their smug colleague, was exposed as a fraud, a manipulator, and a bigot. His private chats, projected in glaring clarity, revealed the depth of his prejudice. Comments filled with racial slurs and mocking caricatures left even the most hardened executives visibly shaken. Victor stood at the far end, pale and sweating, his tie loose, his bravado finally crumbling. "This is character assassination," he barked, his voice rising, but it lacked the power it once carried. Alexander turned his gaze toward him, steady and cold. "Character isn't assassinated, Victor. It's revealed. And yours has been revealed for what it truly is." The journalists in the back scribbled furiously, their cameras capturing every flicker of panic on Victor's face. His final downfall was not a quiet dismissal behind closed doors. It was public, humiliating, irreversible. By the end of the day, his accounts were frozen, his family notified, and his name plastered across headlines. Vice President exposed in racist conspiracy against employee. By evening, Victor Lang was escorted from the building, his protests drowned out by the flash of cameras. For Lillian, the weeks that followed were a blur of emotions. Relief flooded her at first, the sheer release of no longer living in fear. But soon came disbelief, then gratitude, as Alexander quietly approached her with an offer she could scarcely comprehend. "The board has approved your promotion," he told her one late afternoon, his tone softer than she had ever heard it. "You'll serve as Director of Human Resources. No one deserves it more." Her hands shook as she tried to form words. "Mr. Grant, I don't have the kind of degree, the kind of background. You have integrity," he interrupted gently. "And you understand the people who work here better than anyone. That is leadership." Tears filled her eyes. She accepted not because she felt ready, but because she understood what it meant for herself, for Amara, for every other staff member who needed to know their work and their dignity mattered. The change was swift and visible. Under Lillian's guidance, policies were rewritten, bias training was enforced, and most importantly, a scholarship program was launched for employees' children. The very first beneficiary was Amara Carter, her name printed proudly on company newsletters. Staff members, once resigned to the quiet injustices of hierarchy, began to stand taller, their voices finally valued. Alexander, though, did not stop there. He had tasted the bitterness of betrayal and the sweetness of trust, and he wanted to ensure the latter flourished. He announced the Jasmine Carter Educational Fund, a 50-year commitment to provide scholarships to underprivileged children with potential. The name choice stunned Lillian. When she asked him why he hadn't chosen something more corporate, more polished, he smiled faintly. "Because it was her hands that reminded me honesty still exists. That fund will carry her name long after both of us are gone." The gesture reached far beyond the walls of his company. National outlets praised the initiative, universities partnered with the program, and community leaders hailed it as a turning point for corporate responsibility. Alexander Grant, once a billionaire retreating into cynicism, became the face of inclusion and reform. Victor, on the other hand, spiraled. His wealth drained in legal battles, his reputation poisoned. He found himself behind the counter of a used car lot, his sharp suits replaced by cheap jackets, his name a punchline whispered by former colleagues. Customers who recognized him often smirked, sometimes even snapped photos to post online. The mighty had fallen, and no one reached to lift him back up. Lillian, however, flourished. Her office overlooked the city skyline, but she never lost the humility that had guided her from the start. She still packed Amara's school lunches, still hummed softly as she folded laundry at night. But she also carried the weight of new responsibility, making decisions that shaped lives. Her staff respected her deeply, for she carried no airs of superiority, only the steady honesty that had carried her through storms. Alexander visited often, though never with the arrogance of ownership. Instead, he came with quiet conversations, asking her opinions, listening intently. Over time, their exchanges grew less about policy and more about life. He learned about her late husband, about the struggles of raising Amara alone, about the sleepless nights when bills piled higher than hope. And she learned about his loneliness, the betrayals that had hardened him, the nights he sat in penthouses that felt like gilded cages. There were moments soft, fleeting when their eyes lingered a beat too long, when their laughter filled the office after hours. Amara, perceptive beyond her years, sometimes teased, "Mama, Mr. Grant smiles differently when you're around." Both adults laughed it off, but the truth was undeniable. Something was blooming, quietly, respectfully, between a billionaire and the woman who had unknowingly restored his faith. Years later, the company transformed into a beacon of justice and diversity. Awards adorned the lobby, employees thrived, and the Jasmine Carter Educational Fund became a national model. Alexander and Lillian stood side by side at its 10th anniversary gala, Amara beaming proudly beside them, now a young woman ready for college. Cameras flashed, speeches were given, but the truest moment was simple, Alexander whispering to Lillian, "This all began because of you. Because of her. Because you reminded me that trust, once lost, can be found again." The hall erupted in applause as the evening ended, but beneath the noise was something quieter, something only they felt, the shared knowledge that their paths had changed not just their own lives, but countless others. Victor Lang, somewhere in a dim car lot office, scrolled through the photos bitterly on his cracked phone screen. The sight of Alexander, Lillian, and Amara together was salt in his wounds. But he was no longer a threat. He was a relic of what happens when prejudice devours a man from within, leaving him with nothing but regret. Lillian Carter's story became more than survival. It became transformation. A mother's honesty, a child's innocence, and a billionaire's rediscovery of trust had rewritten destinies. Moral lesson. Honesty may seem small when the world tempts with shortcuts, but it builds bridges stronger than any wealth. Preju. Refill Hands ended as a movement of justice and dignity, reminding us all that kindness is not weakness, it is strength. If you believe in the power of honesty, love, and transformation, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, and comment your lessons below. Your story matters too because honesty, once sown, always blossoms.